So one of the things that I started talking about in my channel that was not one of the original reasons I started a channel was hypnosis and mind control. This was a topic that although I was interested in a long time, I really didn't have any experience with. I hadn't been hypnotized or done hypnosis or anything like that. And it was only until basically the lockdowns in 2020 that I got hypnotized and then learned how to do it, and then I've had unending odyssey of interesting, strange, disturbing, like all over the spectrum experiences since then. But one thing that's really interesting about the topic that I haven't addressed explicitly is the saturation or the prevalence, maybe is a better term, of hypnosis and or mind control in media, and especially in children's media. And this is something that I don't really understand why this is the case, but I know personally for me, like it was the catalyst that initially got me interested. So growing up, when I got a little bit older in middle school and high school, I didn't really watch as much television. I had hobbies at that point, whether it was music or Boy Scouts. But prior to that, I did basically spend as much time as I could watching television. I was very much a boob tube kind of person, despite the best efforts of my parents sometimes. And I basically watched whatever was on, and even if I didn't necessarily enjoy something, I would watch it just because that's what I would do typically. And I have no ratio here. I can't say how prevalent or not prevalent, but I will say that mind control or hypnosis stories are quite common. They were quite common, and based on the searches I've done recently, even though more recent cartoons and children programming is not stuff that I watch anymore, and haven't for quite a long time, it does appear that this has continued to be a real common trope. Now, typically it's represented in a supernatural or science fiction way. The method of mind control is usually some kind of magic or spell or some kind of um, technology that is currently non-existent. Only rarely would it be something that was a little bit more grounded, but this was very, very common then and now in a lot of children's television. Now, typically you wouldn't have it as uh, the basic premise of an entire show. I mean, we do have certain characters that are mind control people. So in X-Men, Professor X is a mind control person, although how often does that power actually feature in the storylines? In fact, it raises kind of plot questions if you have a character like that, because just default they should automatically win every engagement. And so there's a verb created in the movies called Professor X'd, because in the movies, in the later live action adaptations of X-Men anyway, you had to get rid of him as a character by injuring him or some other mechanism, because if he was fully there really wouldn't be a story, because he would just mind control the antagonists and fix the plot. But so you don't have, to my knowledge, many shows that are just about that, but they'll episodically deal with it. And when thinking about this video, I was thinking about trying to accumulate examples, and the thing is, there's too many. There's probably hundreds or thousands that you can find online, including many that maybe are in other languages or that are not online or that you might not just be able to find in your searches. That would just take way too long, and you could never cover all the bases, and they kind of repeat the same sort of things. So I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to do a couple. So let me switch to this. So this is one that is pretty famous, but not one that really I mean, I think I saw this is from The Jungle Book, a 1967 Disney film. Disney has a lot of hypnosis in a lot of its film and TV. As a kid, I did watch a lot of Disney TV shows, and many of them did include mind control or hypnosis. This is not a film that I had as a kid. I think I probably had seen it, but I wasn't familiar with it. I will tell you, though, doing hypnosis today, there is a large number of guys in the kink community, in the gay kink community, who saw this film and really this affected them. They really liked the scene in particular. And for those of you who are okay with seeing stuff that's maybe a little edgier, there's a ton of art about this, but there's a couple things I want to say, and I'm picking this because it's a good example. Also, it's a relatively early example as far as cartoons go. I think there are earlier ones than this. Some of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons from the earlier 60s have this. There are things from the 50s and 40s, but this is one of the biggest ones, even though personally this was not something that had a big influence on me. So let's just go ahead and play this. Start the beginning here.
Say now, what have we here? Oh, it's a man cub.
Okay, so right off the start, the association of snakes with hypnosis, as far as I can tell, is a very old one. That there is an idea that snakes mesmerize their prey because sometimes their prey items will freeze. They'll stand very still, apparently in an attempt to avoid being noticed by the snake. And this has been interpreted as by people as the snakes, controlling the mammals. As far as I know, that's not true. But the other thing that I just realized this as I was thinking about making this video, I just realized this very recently. If you close your eyes and you don't look at the snake and see, oh, this is supposed to be some kind of rock python, probably set in India. If you just listen to the voice, what kind of voice, like if you just close your eyes, what kind of person would that be? So in Jungle Book, the animals are anthropomorphized. They have human traits, but they're put into animal bodies. They can talk and whatnot. And what kind of person speaks the way Ka speaks? And it seems to me that this is almost certainly an old man. And the cliche would be like a creepy old man. Like the character from Family Guy or any number of other sources. And I have to wonder, was that a choice? Like what exactly, like what is the inspiration for this? But let's continue.
A delicious man cub.
Oh, go away and leave me alone.
Oh, that's just what I should do, but I'm not. No, now, please go to sleep, man cub.
Yes, man cub. Please go to sleep. Please go to sleep. Sleep.
Tell me you can't hear that that's an old man. Also, look at this. Pose is suggestive to say the least.
Little man cub, rest in peace. Sleep, sleep.
So the other thing, we don't know that snakes do hypnosis. I don't think snakes do hypnosis. So this is supernatural as far as that goes. There's no, explanation as far. But what's interesting is the way they are showing the human here physiologically reacts to going into trance is accurate. The relaxation of the face, the widening of the eyes, and this is another thing. The most common, I think, by far, almost to the exclusion of other things, indicators that somebody is hypnotized in media is to somehow change their eyes, usually to change their color, to make them glow, to either, they might glow a color, they might glow red or blue, but typically they're going to glow white, or the pupils are going to get big, or they're going to have spirals as they have here, and then the face will relax. And so when I watch this, whoever animated this or made this seems to have known what this would actually look like. I mean, obviously, instead of a person, you have a snake. The other thing is with visual stimuli. Anything that draws your attention and focus can put you into a trance. So it doesn't have to be visual. The first person I ever hypnotized, there was no visual aid at all. It was just over the phone, audio only. I've done it just through text, through audio, but like the most cliched way, the way most people are familiar with, and indeed one of the most common, perhaps one of the most effective versions, is to use some kind of visual fixation. In the archetypical hypnotist when it became popularized in the 19th century would be someone holding a pocket watch or a crystal or something on a pendulum or maybe with a metronome and having that move in the line of sight of a subject, usually at or slightly above their eye line, which is again correct here. That's what they're doing here. And by doing that, you can get someone to go into a trance. And how quickly, it depends on the person. There's some people this would happen actually about as fast as it happens here, which is to say almost instantly. There's other people where it would take longer and not be quite so seamless. But it is interesting to me that whoever made this seems to be aware of this. Now we know that, this is 1967. We know hypnotic stage shows were already a thing. I've heard of reports of people going to shows in the 1940s where this was being done. Obviously, Franz Mesmer was hypnotizing people in salons in Paris in the second half of the 18th century. So this was it's interesting. This technique, this practice has been out there, but is not genuinely or generally understood. Right, the general public isn't familiar with it, and so it's presented as supernatural or again sci-fi or whatever. But there's something about this very accurate. It's also it's a little bit disturbing here because and maybe this is me projecting, but I don't think so. It seems like there's a lot of sexual undertones here. He's a boy. It sounds like an old man. He's going to eat him is the kind of the goal here. So we have the eyes.
No use arguing anymore. No more talk till the morning.
He won't be here in the morning.
Also, this happy face, very common for people when they're hypnotized to feel euphoric. It doesn't always happen. It's not necessarily the reaction that everyone has, but it's very, very common. It feels really good for a lot of people to the point of, they often enjoy it and want it to be done more. As somebody who has done hypnosis, I have and I have more or less a steady stream of people who are reaching out to me asking to get hypnotized. And among the reasons is that it feels really good for most people. Not everyone. Some people have different reactions to it, and some people it's not bad or good, but it's just relaxing. The other thing that they say a lot here, and this is also very common, is sleep. The word hypnosis is derived from sleep. It's kind of perceived as an altered state, which I think it is, but one that is somewhere between fully conscious and sleep. And the character Ka here is explicitly using that term quite a bit.
No, yes, he will. Ka! Hold it, Ka!
Oh, my sinus. You have just made a serious mistake, my friend. A very stupid...
No, Ka, I was...
mistake. Look me in the eye.
Notice again, he's higher, looking down.
When I'm speaking to you.
Please, Ka.
Both eyes, if you please.
Okay, notice there that he suddenly becomes erect. Physically erect, but this is a term called catalepsy, and it's one of the basic, most common things you do with hypnosis is you cause usually a limb, an arm or a leg or a hand or something to become stiff, rigid. It's usually one of the first things when you first hypnotize somebody that you'll do to them it's one of the easier suggestions to give. So like, although being hypnotized or not is a binary, you either are or are not. There are levels beneath that where a certain level of trance will allow you to do certain things, but maybe not necessarily everything. So for instance, some people, they can be hypnotized, but aren't necessarily going to have amnesia unless you get them much, much deeper. Catalepsy is something for most people, and again, there's bell curves here, and this isn't true with everyone, but it's very common that catalepsy, the freezing of limbs, is one of the easier things to do. It's one of the simplest things. It's very, very, very rare that I have been unable to induce catalepsy, even in people who couldn't do almost anything else. Catalepsy is something that almost always works. But it also, you can induce it by suggesting that they become cataleptic, which it was not suggested here. But some people will do it on their own, and other people will more relax when they get hypnotized. Like they're, as with the man cub here, as with Mowgli, he relaxed. You saw that his face, and again, whoever made this has more than a little familiarity with the process.
You have just sealed your doom. Ooh.
And it ends there. But what's interesting though is, again, it's in this case literally predatory. In this case, the snake wants to eat. He targets the man cub. Maybe he wants to eat them both. But I think it has very kind of clear sexual undertones. And I will say that for a certain type of person who watches that, especially a child, they pick up on that too, because they end up having some kind of kink or fetish for this. Because I've just encountered many people. Not me. I did not. Like, I think I saw this maybe once or twice. It didn't really register whenever I did. It wasn't a big thing, but like there were many other shows that did. So like my question that I've never understood is this a cart before the horse situation? Is the interest in hypnosis or mind control derived from this media, this material, or is it a fact that this material is made because the people making it, the producers, are themselves interested in this and are to some degree aware of it? And I think it's a bit of both. So when I meet people and I ask them how did they get interested in this, usually the answer is they saw something as a kid like this. It's usually the case that they saw some type of media. Now, very often it's that specific clip, The Jungle Book, but other people, it might be G.I. Joe, it might be The Avengers, it might be X-Men, it might be any number. I mean, there's so many Disney shows, but it's not only Disney shows depict this. And I think it's more prevalent in material for children. I can't prove this. Can't, like, it still happens for material for adult. You could argue, for instance, that the Avengers movies, although they're not rated R or anything, they're not solely for little kids, and yet the main plot of the first Avengers movie is a mind-controlling, alien, which again turns your eyes blue, like indicates. And that's another thing I'll say is when you hypnotize somebody, a couple things happen. Often they get so focused that their pupils dilate, and your pupils dilate for lots of reasons, but when you get really intensely focused on something, they tend to dilate. And they can sometimes, with some people, I've seen them dilate so much that the color disappears, that you basically have a black iris that fills the eye, and I don't think it can fill the sclera. But the other thing is their eyes will roll back, something like that. And that makes your eyes look creepy and white. And I won't say creepy, but like they look white. And I often think that the inspiration for this, I mean, there might be practical reasons. You want to show that a character is being mind controlled, and so what do? Do you turn them purple, or do you, give them a horn on their head, or do you do something? One of the simplest things you could do, especially for an animator, is just change the eye color. But then when someone is hypnotized, you get that rolling, and that eye roll back, and then basically the sclera takes up the entire what's visible. So that might be a big part of it. So the people who are making this material are obviously, I mean, they could just be deciding, hey, we think this is compelling material because maybe our audience wants it. Maybe they did the research and it turns out when you poll kids who watch the Disney Channel that they want to see hypnosis videos, and so they put it into things. But I kind of don't think that's the case. I think that they're the ones deciding what the content is and then packaging it for the demographic. It's my hunch that the people making it are into this stuff and are putting it out there. And it's being, and again, it proceeds, it goes, I mean, as far as cartoons go, I think you can find them back to at least the 60s, if not the 50s. Start going much further than that, there isn't nearly as much media to go by, and there's far less of it for us to to find. Um, Going back even further, let's see if I can pull this up. So this is a famous painting from 1904. I don't want to say famous. This is a painting from 1904 called Hypnosis. It's by a um, Russian/German painter. He was born in St. Petersburg, but he lived in Russia. Or, sorry, spent most of his career in Germany and in Italy. He was gay, so if you want to draw homoerotic things, this apparently was, I haven't seen it, but apparently this was inspiration for a scene in the more recent film, The Lighthouse. I have not seen The Lighthouse, so I don't know if that's true or not. But again here, I mean, the sexual innuendo here is pretty strong, and we have this character which the face is obscured enough that it would be difficult to, say. I mean, it's male. Obviously, we don't have mammary glands. There's no boobs. It's built like a man. You can't necessarily say that it's an older or younger man, I guess, except for perhaps the fact the shading, um, the shading is kind of indicative of a beard. But again, you have the up higher looking down. Now, this is somewhat of a opposite where this person's eyes are closed and this person's eyes are glowing. Usually hypnotist's eyes is not going to glow when he's hypnotizing someone. And the subject's eyes are closed, which does happen. And in fact, this head back, very common if you have someone seated, that their head will fall back, and indeed their eyes will. So like this isn't too crazy as far as that goes. But then what my point is, though, this is from 1904, so this is way before any of those cartoons. But this seems to be in the zeitgeist. So the other thing is, if you read about it, it looks like there are quite a few novels in the 19th century where there were characters, hypnotist characters who would use their eyes to hypnotize. Very often the trope then is women. The idea that you use a man hypnotize a woman. The other genre where this is very, very kind of clear is the whole vampires genre. Vampires are almost always depicted as having some kind of hypnotic, trance-like power. Sometimes it's more subtle. It's just that so if you look at Twilight, which is very unusual in the way that it depicts vampires, they're just super beautiful and sparkly and they look nice. But in many other versions, they have direct trance-inducing hypnotic powers. And so it is a question to the extent are people's experiences now. So like if you have somebody who's never been hypnotized, they're not familiar with it, but they've seen this literature, they've seen this media, they've grown up with it very likely. When they actually have their first experience getting hypnotized, it's informed by those experiences, and so then they will conform and or act that way because that's what they saw. So that's an element of it. But the other possibility that I think is more true is that, or at least that I lean towards, even though I can't prove it, is that these depictions are themselves based on reality. They're based on how people actually act when they're hypnotized. And then it's interesting too because the way it's almost always presented, and there are exceptions to this, but it's almost always presented as supernatural or science fiction if you get into later stuff. And so the consumer of the media is going to see that and think this is, whatever they may think about compelling or interesting as a plot device or as a power, are going to think this is fake or make-believe. And although the method that hypnosis happens, the method of the mind control in the shows is, it might be supernatural or involve some kind of technology. And in some cases, it might be exaggerated, so you have a character like, say, Professor X can just control everyone in the world with his hat without even being there. Like, so look, there's nobody who can do that as a hypnotist. But then you walk away with this idea that, like, you can't actually hypnotize people to, go against their will or to do right. And I actually think that's wrong. I think that you totally can. Now, is it necessarily super easy? Can you do it as fast as you often depict? Usually not, although again, there are bell curves and there are people that will work very fast. There are people where you can do a lot in a very short amount of time. And there's other people where you can do a lot, but it maybe not in a short amount of time, but over time you can do it. And we also know, it's becoming more popular now, that like, the CIA took this serious enough to study it for a long time, and potentially still now, through the MK Ultra. We know that they were doing that. We know that people like Charlie Manson were hypnotists, and probably were part of a CIA program. Either they were running it or part of the experiment themselves. The whole Haight-Ashbury Clinic in San Francisco was run by academics who were doing research for MK Ultra, and that's where Hansen was based. But he's just one example. There's also the issue that the people who the main purveyors of hypnosis now are hypnotherapists and like stage hypnotists, and they're really doing hypnosis, but they have every incentive to kind of downplay its, for lack of a better term, more coercive aspects. Now that's even kind of like an ethically weird way to think about it. Like if I talk to someone and I hypnotize them and make them do something, is it really coercion or not? And it's actually a fascinating question. But most of the hypnotic industry, for lack of a better term, they have a very strong incentive to downplay that potential and basically say it's impossible. And they'll just say, look, you just can't make somebody do something against their will. Some of the other ones will be more nuanced and say something more along the lines of, if somebody ends up doing what they're hypnotized to do, then that means that they really wanted to do it, right? So it doesn't matter if a person tells you 100 times that they don't want to do X. If you hypnotize them to do X, it means that, and they subsequently do it, it means that they really did want to do X, and this protestation to the otherwise was false to some degree or for some reason. And to be fair to them, like that is actually, it's very hard to prove that that's not the case. I've satisfied myself that you can do this, and that there's just a very strong incentive for hypnotists to deny this, because the ethical implication of what's happening suddenly radically changes the moment that becomes a possibility. If it's up to the point that somebody can just say no whenever they want to say no, and they can't do anything that they don't want to do, then the hypnotist doesn't really have any kind of coercive power or any kind of real power at all, because you're just playing Simon Says. The people are only doing what they're willing to do. If they are capable of doing that, well, it opens up a whole bunch of very strange ethical questions that are really complicated and unfortunately have not really been dealt with or thought about legally or ethically. And a lot of these people, their livelihood is kind of dependent on that discussion not happening. If you're making a living hypnotizing high school kids, which a lot of stage hypnotists are doing, they'll go to colleges or high schools and they'll hypnotize part of the audience. If you're able to control people against their will, then the potential for abuse is just far, 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 far higher. If you're not able to do that, then it's hard to say that any abuse can happen. It's basically impossible, because the only thing people will do is stuff that they, quote unquote, want to do anyway. And so you will have these hypnotists just swear up and down that this is impossible. Now, some of them, I actually doubt any of them really believe that. The ones who are actually hypnotists and are good at doing it, I think, know better. They may honestly believe it in the sense that it's a tautology that once you agree to do it because of a hypnotic suggestion, that means that you do want to do it now. And so therefore, it's just like you persuaded somebody to do something they didn't want to do. But at the moment that you've persuaded them, and the act of persuasion itself is not coercive or crossing any line, that it's okay. But then this causes like this, I don't want to say it's a catch-22, but it kind of, legally speaking, if it were to come down to, hey, he hypnotized me to do something against my will and maybe commit a crime, for instance, and you argue that you had no control of yourself, the defense is going to very plausibly and very easily going to have a whole long line of specialist experts, hypnotists, are going to be able to say, that's not possible. You can't make somebody do something against their will. But this kind of the point is that you can change someone's will. you can make somebody feel, think, or do something that they would not have felt, thought, or done prior to that. So yeah, and I think it's interesting, and I don't know why. Why is this so prevalent in media, especially child media? It seems like there is an interest in popularizing this among kids, for lack of a better term. Is it because, again, they just think that this is interesting content that kids would enjoy, and maybe it is? Or is it that they are interested in this and they're putting it into the content to kind of, I don't want to say groom, because the connection between the producers and the consumers is too remote, right? So if there is a producer doing this and he's putting this in the material, the person who made Jungle Book, for instance, they're not going to get a reward necessarily for doing that. It's not like someone's going to see that movie and then somehow meet the producer and want to get hypnotized, right? Like there's too many steps between, at least as far as I can tell. Maybe there's a plausible connection that someone else could point out, but for my money, that seems unlikely. But that they're just very interested in it and they want to put it out there. But there does seem to be this through line that this is something that's been happening, basically, I don't want to say under the surface, like it's public, but it's not public in the sense that like the public does not appreciate what is possible and what actually can and does happen. Um, and to the point when stuff does happen, when there are incidents that become more popular, like with Charles Manson, or like with the principal in Florida who hypnotized like half the school, or um, any number of other examples, the general population doesn't really appreciate what is and isn't possible, and so they don't know what to make of it. If it's just for fun and you can't make people do anything against your will, then what exactly is the problem with the high school principal hypnotizing half of his stuff? For those who don't remember, I made a video a while ago, but I think it was Amazon did a long series called "Look Into My Eyes" about a principal um, in Florida who hypnotized a huge, I think it's like 60 or 70 students and staff at his school. And in the documentary, he interacts with some of them. This is now I think more than a decade later, and in fact, I think it's almost 20 years later at this point. Um, and my watching it, he clearly had basically brainwashed those people. By brainwashed, I mean he'd conditioned them to be obedient, submissive, and devoted to him, to the point where they love him and will do whatever he wants, essentially. And it was clear as day to me that that was was happening there. But somebody who wouldn't know would see that and not know. And so there's this two-level thing going on where people who don't know will see it and be like, I don't see what the big deal is. But if you know, you can see there's a lot more going on there, and it's in a whole other, it's like a different dimension of ethical territory there. And the other reason I kind of been thinking about this is because people we've had all these shooters and stuff, and they act really strange, and people like kind of my takeaway is we don't know. I'm satisfied that with no drugs, no augmentation of any kind technologically, it's possible to totally brainwash somebody and make them into whatever you want. Now, most people are not going to do that. Like a normal, regular person is not going to do that and turn someone into an assassin, because they don't want an assassin. They want somebody who's going to clean their house or, give them sexual favors or whatever. But hypothetically, that is something that you would be able to do. And it might take time. It might not be something that can be done with everybody. There's a bell curve here, and there are people who are harder to hypnotize and harder to brainwash, but they're not exactly, it's a small part of the population. The majority of people, it'll work, and it's just a matter of time. And that's not even getting into if you start implementing sleep deprivation or drug use. I don't ever do either of those, but like there seems to be evidence that if you combine it with LSD or scopolamide or any number of other things, that you can you can build like whole other personalities, totally Manchurian Candidate style. That this seems something that is well within the possibilities and the capabilities of just a person who knows how to do hypnosis. That's something that they can do. If you start adding other capabilities on top of that, it seems like it's only that much more plausible. And just in my, I'm not in like this position. I'm not in a huge city. I'm not in a power center. I'm not by a military base or anything like that. But just the people that I've encountered just through dating apps, social media, hypnosis forums, even accepting that there are people who are delusional or make stuff up or exaggerate or embellish, all of things that do happen 100%, that, full spectrum brainwashing, personality control, personality changing, enslavement, that stuff actually, it totally does happen, but it happens in such a way that it's it's very hard to detect and it's almost impossible to do anything about. Once you have somebody who's in that position, they're not going to tell anyone, they're not going to view it as a crime themselves, and most people are not going to tell. Like I know that even a lot of you who might take me really seriously and respect my opinion about a lot of things, about economics or politics or history or whatever, are going to hear something like that and just think that can't be true or that seems highly, highly unlikely. And I totally appreciate and respect the skepticism. It's something that I certainly felt. It's like I said, as a kid, I would see this stuff and I thought it was really cool. I definitely found it erotic as a child. But when I got a little bit older, I would say by the time I was like 12 or 13, I had concluded that this really was fake, that this was not a real thing, that hypnosis was not something that was actually effective, that it was just placebo and playing along and, just people consciously deciding to take on a role. And to be fair, that all also happens. There are many times that that's happening. I've talked to people who have been in stage shows when they were on stage and they were not hypnotized at all, and yet they did everything because they felt like it was fun and they felt like I don't want to let everyone down. Right, but I've also met people on stage shows who have 100% amnesia, that don't remember anything that happened from the time they walked into the auditorium until 30 minutes after, when they're having lunch with their friends at a local restaurant. Um, so and then I would, I mean, when people tell me those stories, and I'm thinking about a couple, there's at least two examples where I met guys who had that experience that I subsequently hypnotized, and they were just phenomenal subjects. They would do anything. Um, and that was only in a couple minutes with somebody who, I'm a good hypnotist. I think I have a certain talent for it, but I'm not the best. I don't have the most experience. I haven't refined every technique possible. It's generally not necessary. You can have a couple basics, and that's more than enough to do the job, so to speak. So there's this, yeah, it's this weird, and this is not the only thing. I think there's a couple things like this where there's like the public, general, and then there's that has a very perfunctory. The general populace has a very perfunctory understanding or lack of understanding. And then there's what's really possible, and there's a huge disconnect. And so a lot of, for lack of a better term, abuse can happen because people's perception of what is possible is just so much less. People don't think that you can be brainwashed or that you can be hypnotized to do stuff against your will. And so when it happens, they don't see it. And when they're even told about it, they don't believe it. And the first conclusion that someone has when they're told about it, like if somebody were to come and say, I've been brainwashed against my will, the first conclusion most people are going to have is that this person is probably crazy or just making it up. And to be fair, totally could be true. There are crazy people. There are people, who think the most absurd, unverifiable things. There are people who do lie and who make stuff up. So like those two conclusions are absolutely understandable and very often correct. But the possibility that somebody actually has been mind controlled or brainwashed it is a possibility. It really can happen. It really does happen. And the fact that a large number of people just assume that it's impossible, that it could never work that way, actually gives cover for it happening. It makes it easier to do because it's so laughable to most people otherwise. And even me just talking about it sacrifices a certain degree of my credibility with a lot of people. One reason that I've felt the desire to talk about, one reason that I think it's interesting, but also I want to try and get people to understand this is something that can happen and it does happen. And you don't have to have CIA money to make it happen. You can just be a person who does it. And it happens. It happens all the time. Now, the thing that I don't know, I I can't prove, and I don't have direct evidence that it's happening at a industrial scale or in an organized collective way. But I also have several times started to get the feeling that is also happening. That there are coordinated mass brainwashing things happening. I'm not. I don't know that for sure. And there's obviously a semantic, like if you hypnotize one person, okay, fine. If you brainwash two people, it's now that a mass hypnotic event. But there definitely are networks. There's definitely networks of hypnotists out there who practice and do this sort of stuff, and they do it together as groups. How organized and how widespread, I don't know. I think most of them are very careful to not be too public about most of it. There's stuff that you can do that's public, and there's stuff that you can't do. So like some of the, like there's people on YouTube right now who are stage hypnotists who make videos about doing stage hypnosis, and specifically doing it like to kids, to like high schools, who are like that I know are working with other hypnotists doing very similar things, and that when they go and do high school after high school after high school, they're doing the shows and they're getting paid, but they're also vetting and looking for what might be an imprecise term, victims, uh, like people that they can brainwash or that they want to brainwash. And there are subtle ways of transitioning from a stage show at a high school to getting some of those kids to do stuff off camera, and to kind of, I don't know how much I want to say here, but it happens. I could even, I don't want to, like it's hard to name names and without being sure, but like this definitely is a thing. This definitely happens, and the general public's assumptions about what is and isn't possible facilitates this in a lot of ways. And the hypnotic class, they also perpetuate this. And I think, like if I listen to hypnotists and they get asked this, sometimes they do get asked this question, can you hypnotize somebody to do something against their will? If they say yes, you can, and there are some who will say that. So that when I was first learning, the book that I read to learn, I mean, I learned in a couple different ways, but I did read a book. The book I read was called Reality is Plastic by, I think his name was Anthony Jacquin. The very first page, I believe, he addresses this, and he says, he acknowledges the semantic quibbling that can be done and maybe should be done, but says, in general, yes, you can hypnotize people to do stuff against their will. To me, that speaks to his credibility and his honesty. If I hear hypnotists say that it's impossible, that you can't make people do stuff against their will, they are, in my opinion, probably lying. Now, there might be some who are not some hypnotists are not very good, and so maybe that is their honest opinion because they're just not able to do that, or they're doing the semantic game and not necessarily an unjust game of just making it a tautology that if I hypnotize somebody to do something and they do it, then it's not against their will because they did it, or it was against their will until I gave them the suggestion that it not be against their will, at which point it became not against their will, and when 3 seconds later they followed that suggestion at that point, it was now their will. And this is an interesting kind of case. Like if you're just talking to somebody and you persuade them to do something, that's not coercion. Like you're allowed to ask someone if they should do something or not. And getting somebody into a hypnotic state, into a hypnotic trance, doesn't involve like really crossing any clear ethical border that most people would recognize as such. And so, yeah, but then you have this situation where the power dynamics are such that they just can't say no anymore to a very large degree or even to a total degree if you really, really push it. And again, it's not always the case. So, well, you hypnotize somebody and 10 minutes later they'll literally do anything. Although that I think that is true with some people, but the more you work on it, the more time you put into it, the more effective and overwhelming it can be. And you will get to a point, and I think this is true for almost all people, it's totally possible to get to a point where you can't say no and you just have to automatically do what you're told, whatever that is. And the fact that we have like this double game where it's being depicted, it's being shown that way, but it's also presented that this is fantastical and not real. The general public then walks away with this idea that it's fantastical and it's not real, and so then when it really happens, they are blind to it. And I think that people shouldn't be blind to it, and I think that people should, I think it should be more openly talked about and studied. You know, the fact is that to me, it's not, it's like a lot of things, it's not good or bad, it's neutral. You can use it for good or for bad. But it's very powerful, and when people diminish how powerful it can be or is, they're really opening I mean, they're denying themselves potential benefits, but they're also blinding themselves to potential abuses. And we could, and again, it's even kind of debatable. Do you call this abuse at the point of the person wants whatever they're told that they want? Yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think? What are your guys' experience? What do you guys feel about this? How prevalent do you think this is in the culture? Why do you think it's so prevalent? Where do you think this comes from? There are anthropologists who think that shamanism involves hypnosis and trance-like states and that this goes way, way, way back. And I've certainly read historical figures that I've thought this only makes sense if we're trying to make I mean, you can always invoke supernatural things to explain things, but there's many instances in history where I've thought, if this isn't supernatural, the thing that would explain this would be hypnotically induced trances. I'm thinking now specifically of Passacomawi, who was a Native American chief here in New England. Very famous one. He's well documented in the historical record because he lived during the early colonial period. You know, it seems like an incredible guy. Was something like 7 feet tall, they say, which means he was probably 6'2", but that's what the records say. He lived to be like 100 years old, which they're pretty sure about. But he was said to have these abilities to turn invisible, to turn sticks into snakes, and snakes into sticks, and do all this magic. And either it was supernatural or the people witnessing it believed all those things happened. And I was like, yeah, I can make people believe that's happening. I can hypnotize someone to think a stick is a snake or that I'm invisible. I've turned invisible for people. And so when I read that, I think, barring a supernatural explanation, or that he was a Penn and Teller type magician who could do that yeah, he could put people into a trance, make them suggestible, and make them believe it was happening. Yeah, that's easy enough. It's really not that hard. And that's the other thing that, kind of surprised me. It's just a natural state people go in. I mean, people can go into this trance-like state where they're just super open to suggestions, even things that are impossible they can then be made to believe. and it's just an innate ability that people have. Now, the other interesting question, and I've asked this before and I don't have an answer, is this some kind of hack, like a mistake in our physiology that it just so happens if you do this right certain number of steps that you can go into a trance and become hypnotized, or is it actually not a bug? So kind of like, how, have you ever heard of sharks can have this catatonic state where if you turn a shark on its back, it just blanks out and becomes helpless. And so like killer whales will flip over a great white shark and then it will just lay there and they can eat it, right? And there's no evolutionary advantage for that to happen. It just seems to be a quirk of their biology that, they just lose consciousness. There's a technical term for it. I can't remember what it is now. Is hypnosis like that, or is hypnosis like it's there for an evolutionary reason? And I can think of a lot of reasons in a social animal species why it would be there, but we don't know. It doesn't get researched. And because it's also it has this this kind of ambiguous status within academia as well as within the general culture. So within academia, you're looking at about a 50-50 split where about half are saying this is totally a big nothing burger. It's just placebo and faking and fraud, and there's no there, and then the other half thinks, yeah, there is something there, and but we don't really understand it, and we don't take it all that seriously. There's plenty of totally respected, even famous researchers who are familiar with hypnosis and who use hypnosis and who have studied it, but that has not permeated the academic literature enough that it's taken as seriously as I think that it should. And even among them, they don't understand exactly what's happening. They don't really, why is this happening? What is the point of this? But it's there. And it's there, and for anyone who is aware of it, you can hack it and you can use it. I mean, I don't know what other way to say it. Like, and you can make a career out of it, hypnotizing people at stage shows. And I keep saying kids at high schools. It's not always people do colleges. It's popular in Vegas. I mean, you can do adults. There's stage shows for adults. Corporations will hire people to come and do stage shows. But or hypnotherapists. Totally, you can use it to do hypnotherapy, and it's for many things. It's very, very effective. Now, obviously, if you have an infectious disease or cancer, you probably can't hypnotize the tumor away or make the, kill the chlamydia bacteria infection. But if it's psychosomatic, yeah, or if you have things with diet or body image or phobias, it's effective on all that stuff. I've used it for people who have gymnophobia easily. I've heard of that happening with other people. So it's totally real in that sense, but because it is in this kind of purgatory state, a lot of stuff can happen, and just like, I've had people message, because people know I'm into this, so I've had friends message me who were not into hypnosis themselves, but they knew I was, and I'm like, hey, and they tell me a story of, the most extreme brainwashing sexual abuse that you can basically imagine. And in this case I'm thinking of, this guy was a prosecutor. He was an attorney, a prosecutor, and I asked him, as a prosecutor, are you? Because I didn't see this firsthand. I was like, he was describing a whole family that had been brainwashed, and that the hypnotist was having them have incest with each other, so brother, and the two brothers with their mother, and that they were recruiting other. But I asked, like, is this, from your understanding, is this really happening, or is this somebody pulling a prank, or, like just making it up? And he said his best assessment was that it was real, that it was actually happening. But so he's presented with that, and it's like, he doesn't know if hypnosis is real, and so he thinks, like, is this just a weird family, or is this, were these people brainwashed to do these things? And the way he described, we went into a lot of detail, but like, it definitely happened. And also he was definitely getting targeted. And the fact that he was a prosecutor probably explained that. But because, and what's interesting too, is even after this hypnotist who had taken over this family, and probably other people as well, was targeting him and trying to get him to get hypnotized. And he was like, yeah, well, it won't work on me, so I'm fine with that. And there's a chance, in fact, that it wouldn't work. There are people where it's very difficult, but it's a minority. It's a small group. Most of the people I do tell me it's not going to work on them, and 9 times out of 10, they're wrong. And that's me, and I'm not the best hypnotist who ever lived. I think I'm pretty good, but like I'm not the best, and I'm not going to try forever. Like I'm doing it recreationally. If it's not working, it's not working, and I'm not going to waste my day, right? But like somebody could be far better than me and far more motivated. And I just said, you're really tempting fate in a way I don't think you realize. Um, and you know, this is common whenever I do anyone. A lot of them don't believe it's real. Even the ones who do, basically almost none of them are ready for how effective it is. Some people are surprised that it affects them in a way they didn't expect, um, but it's way more powerful than people realize. And it's like after the first time, they get it, but it's that but by then it's like it's too late because they've already started to get conditioned at that point. And the first time is always the hardest, which is not to say it's hard. It's usually not hard. Um, but then every subsequent time gets easier and easier and easier, and it gets to the point. I mean, so I had a subject over last night, and I've known him a while, and I put him under a lot of times, and he came over, and I just wanted to catch up and let's talk for a while, and it was impossible because within 25 seconds he was out. Because I mean, he just associates my voice, and you know, like that's I've had that happen multiple. I've had it happen. I used to hypnotize people when I was driving a lot. I'd be driving in my car and I would hypnotize people over the phone. And sometimes I would then subsequently meet them and we'd get in the car and we'd be driving and I'd be asking them about the weather or whatever. And like they would go out because the sound of my car, because they associated the sound of my car with the sessions. And not, you know, rightly so, because that's what all the sessions have been. So yeah, you need to know that that's a possibility. Again, that's not a reason. It's just like you should know if you skydive, you could, you know, your chute might not open. You should know that, right? You should know, you know, if you drive, you can be in a car accident. You should know if you go hiking in certain places, you might get attacked by a bear or get hypothermia, you know, or like, you know, here in the White Mountains, if you hike above tree line in the, like, it could get cold, it could snow, you could get hypothermia. So like you should be aware of that. And if you aren't aware of that, you take risks that are unnecessary. And the problem with I see with hypnosis is people are not aware of the risks. And so a lot of stuff that's unnecessary things happen as a result of that. And so I just want people to know that that's possible and that they should be aware of that and have that in the back of their mind as a possible explanation for things. Not all the time, and it's not taking away that there are totally there's crazy people, there's delusional people, there's fakers. There's like a lot of the stuff you see on Twitter is fake. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not real. But the reality is much closer to the fantasy than people tend to realize. So anyway, I think that's enough for that. Let me know what you guys think, and have a great day.